Super Mario Bros. 3 is a game with a lot of cool stuff in it. Unfortunately for me, most of it is cool, unique stuff, so it doesn't fit in terribly well with this series, where the point is to show how each game built on the previous ones and introduce things that would stick around as part of the general Mario legacy. But what are side notes for in the first place, if not to rescue me from the consequences of my own arbitrary decisions? So for the next little while, I'm going to just kick back and marvel at each of this game's 8 wondrously inventive worlds, and the fascinating secrets they contain. Oh, by the way, for this one I'm going to use screenshots of the Super Mario All-Stars version, because that's the one I have nostalgia for, and to mix things up a bit. All the things I show here are present in the original version too, at least I'm pretty sure they are. So first off, we have Grassland, the shortest and simplest of the 8 worlds. Sort of like Congo Jungle from Donkey Kong Country, this place has the most straightforward and gimmick-free levels because it's getting you adjusted to the game's basic moveset. 1-4, for instance, is the first auto-scrolling stage. 1-2 introduces you to the bouncy note platforms, and the first stage gives you a whole slew of things to figure out, like the Super Leaf and the P-switch, which I just realized I forgot to talk about in the main video. I guess it was so obvious it kind of slipped my mind. No big deal though, I'll get into detail with it when we move on to Super Mario World. Aesthetically speaking, Grassland is pretty plain, maybe because it's meant to evoke the feel of the original Super Mario Bros., before the explosion of visual variety that its sequels ushered in. My favorite secrets here are the 2 warp whistles tucked away in Stage 1-3 and the Fortress. These exist outside the normal boundaries of the level, again similar to the warp pipes in Super Mario Bros., but even trickier in this case because the place you have to get to isn't even visible from where you start. To get the one in 1-3, you have to crouch down on one of the blocky platforms for several seconds, at which point you'll find yourself dropping through it and end up behind all the scenery. Then, as long as you don't jump or get hit, you can run to the right and pass through the other side of the black screen at the end of the level. This transports you to a hidden room where the warp whistle will be waiting. The one in the Fortress is even easier. Just get to the last doorway before the Boom Boom Room and use a Super Leaf to fly up and over the right-hand wall. Again, you'll be teleported to a hidden room with the whistle. Next we have Desertland, or the Desert Hill. This world is a major step up in difficulty from Grassland, and it's where I started having a lot of trouble with the game as a kid. It also suffers a little in the variety department due to its theme. Deserts aren't exactly known for their visual diversity, so Desert Hill relies a little more than other worlds on the enemies to keep you engaged. This is where we first see both swamps and boos, making it clear that most fortress stages in Super Mario Bros. 3 are going to be very different from the castles of the original. But this world also gave us one of the most legendary one-off enemies in Mario history, the Angry Sun that appears in the unnumbered Quicksand stage. Fulfilling a similar role to Lakitu in Super Mario Bros., the Angry Sun is a menace not because of any special moves, but just because it moves in an erratic and hard-to-predict way. I always assumed that this thing was indestructible, but apparently you can get rid of it with hammers or a Koopa shell. On the other hand, you'd be unlikely to have a hammer suit this early, and if you're skilled enough to actually hit this wacky wobbler with a shell, you probably also wouldn't have any problem just avoiding it for the 30 seconds it takes to finish the stage. All things considered, this isn't a huge challenge, but there's something about its unexpectedly nasty behavior and expression that gives new meaning to the idea of the sun beating down on you. I also like this pool in the sky in 2-4, which is a nice little visual treat for thorough explorers. And of course the Pyramid stage, which is a good introduction to the puzzle style of level design that you see a lot in later worlds. Speaking of which, let's move on to Waterland, also known as Seaside. One clever touch here is that even though most of the stages are on land, every single one touches the water on at least one side, reinforcing the wateriness of the whole ensemble. Another one is that the last part of the world, where the castle is located, looks uncannily like the 4 islands that make up mainland Japan: Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, and Hokkaido. I normally hate underwater levels, but for some reason I love the water stages in Super Mario Bros. 3. Part of it is undoubtedly the music that plays in them, but I also find that they're easier than the ones in other Mario games. Maybe that's to compensate for the fact that most of your normal moves don't work here? Who knows? Actually, the stages that do drive me crazy in this world are the ones taking place just above the surface of the water, like 3-2 and especially 3-3, in which a series of raising and lowering platforms puts you at constant risk of being swallowed whole by a boss bass. Did I forget to mention boss bass? Well, it's basically just a giant cheep that insta-kills you on contact and constantly respawns if you somehow manage to get rid of it. I honestly don't even know if I got past this stage when I was little. I had 2 older siblings, and we all played video games as a family back then, so with games like Super Mario Bros. 3, I have no idea who managed to get past what. One last tidbit about this world is that if you break a certain boulder, you can get access to a raft that will take you across the sea to a treasure island full of toad houses and minigame squares. This is probably a reference to the raft from The Legend of Zelda, a project which Takashi Tezuka was already very nostalgic about. For another example, take the Warp Whistle, which has basically the same sprite and jingle associated with it as the flute from Zelda. In fact, it also has the same function, summoning a whirlwind to transport you to a distant location. World 4 starts kind of oddly. You actually begin the world on a landmass with no stages, so you have to use one of the pipes to make it to what you might call World 4 proper. This is one of those design decisions that's almost inexcusable from a strict fun or not fun perspective. So things like this always make me think of Tezuka and his interest in throwing curveballs just for the heck of it. It makes the worlds feel distinct that some of them work like this, almost like they weren't designed specifically for you to play through them. You know, like Mario is just stumbling across real places that happen to be between him and his goal. Anyway, that's enough of that. World 4 is Giant Land, also known as Big Island. And yeah, it's right up front with the gimmick here. Enter 4-1 and you immediately encounter a giant Koopa, a giant piranha plant, and blocks so big you could practically eat breakfast off their beveled edges. This is probably the silliest world in the game, and the one that exists most just because. The enemies being huge is mostly a cosmetic difference, not doing much to switch up the gameplay. Really, my favorite stages here are the ones that don't fit the theme, like the first fortress, which introduces us to the candle-camouflaged Hotfoots. I think it says something about this world that one of the more interesting gimmicks it pulls is in 4-6, where you can go through a door and end up in a stage identical to where you were originally, except that now all the enemies aren't giant. This switcheroo is probably the inspiration for Tiny Huge Island in Super Mario 64, where it has to be said they do a lot more with the concept. Here it just screws with your brain for a couple of seconds, and that's only remarkable because the rest of the world is on the bland side. On the other hand, Skyland, the fifth world, has long been my favorite. The theme here is that most of the world is up on a cloud floating in the sky, but you don't start out there. Instead, you play a few stages on the ground in order to reach this huge tower fortress on the very edge of the land, which connects this introductory area to the actual Skyland. One of these ground stages, 5-3, features a power-up found nowhere else in the game, and which in fact didn't properly return until Super Mario Maker, after more than 20 years. This is Karibo's shoe, also known as Goomba's shoe, which is worn by a subtype of Goomba that hops around trying to squish you. If you manage to hit the block it's standing on, the shoe is left behind, sort of like Lakitu's cloud, and you can climb aboard and scoot yourself around just like the Goomba was doing. The main advantage of using the shoe is that it lets you walk on spiky enemies and munchers, so it's a rather situational power-up. But it also changes your movement physics ever so slightly, giving a springier quality to Mario's jumps. I love the Karibo shoe, and not just because it looks friggin' adorable. It's another one of those Tezuka touches that doesn't really make the game much easier or harder, just different. But the real magic happens when you enter that tower in the distance. This is the only fortress in the game with a large section taking place outside, and being on top of an enormous pile of blocks with nothing behind you but the sky really sells how high up Mario is supposed to be here. Not only that, but this is the only stage you might have to run through backwards, since it stays on the board after being completed, and if you want to return to the ground, which might be unavoidable if the airship flies down there, you have to physically retrace your steps to climb down. Like so many things in Super Mario Bros. 3, this is just unique. It's something that even really inventive games like Yoshi's Island wouldn't consider doing, because of course when you finish a level it should stay finished. There's a lot of people who are much bigger fans of Super Mario Bros. 3 than its follow-up Super Mario World, and I think that has something to do with the fact that Super Mario World was largely concerned with inventing new rules for how levels would work, while Super Mario Bros. 3 asked the opposite question: what rules from previous games can we break in a fun and interesting way? For a stage element that this game actually shares with Yoshi's Island, look no further than the intermittently spinning rotary lifts from stage 5-4. These appeared earlier in World 3, but only one at a time, while here they're the main type of platform. So even though this is possibly the shortest level in the game, it's so chaotic that it ends up being quite memorable. Athletic stages like this, which focus on platforming, are Skyland's primary strong point, and it may overuse them just a tad. But then again, Mario is a platforming series, so you could argue that this is what it should be all about. But let's not get bogged down by questions of what Mario should or shouldn't be. That's what main videos are for. Let's instead move on to the sixth world, Iceland, one of the most mysterious and subtly intimidating worlds in any Mario game. You would think this place would focus on challenges related to ice physics, like World 4 from Super Mario Bros. 2, but actually that accounts for less than half of this world's stages. What Iceland is, more than anything else, is tricky. Despite the very different aesthetics, I'm dead certain that the Forest of Illusion from Super Mario World was partly based on this world, because it goes above and beyond to mess with you. The first fortress has a power-up which I swear is meant to trick you so you fall into the lava. Whether it's a mushroom or a leaf, actually stopping to pick it up leaves you so far behind the platform that you're screwed, unless you have superhuman timing. This same fortress has a section where you're at a disadvantage if you have a power-up, since you have to squeeze through a tiny gap in the wall in the same area where there's an invincibility star. A star which you'll probably waste if you aren't Little Mario, because you'll use up the whole invincibility period trying to get past the wall. Then we have 6-5, the stage I mentioned in the main video, where you have to fly through the ceiling with a Koopa shell. This is something no other level makes you do, so thank goodness they give you the maximum amount of time, because I can easily see this taking someone 5 minutes just to figure out what you're supposed to do, let alone actually accomplishing it, which is far from simple. In most big Japanese cities, snow is a pretty rare occurrence, so the idea of wintry weather, especially as something essential to daily life, tends to be associated with exotic foreign cultures, rather than Japan itself. I think that's what's going on here. It would explain why Iceland is more weird than icy, per se. Except for the second fortress, which is made entirely of ice, but come on, that's a given, isn't it? It wouldn't be Iceland without an ice palace. We even have those in real life. But we do not have anything in real life like World 7, the pipe maze. I guess the closest thing would be a jungle island, like Borneo or something. Only Borneo doesn't have metal pipes shooting up out of the ground every couple of feet, or massive red and white spotted plants with gaping toothy maws. Okay, may have spoken a bit too soon there, but it definitely doesn't have pipes growing out of the ground. This is the most fanciful world in the game, and rather than sticking with one background theme, it features a mix of several earlier themes, including a disorienting desert-themed level, where you're encouraged to keep moving between different levels of the stage with pipes, although the real exit is through the one right at the end. There's also an underground level that requires you to use the otherwise obscure mechanic of running off-screen to the left in order to wrap around and pass to the right side. You can actually do this in any stage where the screen doesn't scroll from left to right, but I never realized it until this stage because none of the others makes you. This was pretty common in Kid Icarus, and even in Super Mario Bros. 2, but this game does tend to favor horizontal movement over the vertical most of the time. This same level also makes use of a platform that, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't appear in any other Mario game. The directional lift, which will send out a ghostly emanation of itself in the direction of the arrow painted on it, except for the ones with exclamation points, which can change directions when you jump up and down on them. But for sheer oddness, nothing else in this world beats the first fortress. When you begin this stage, you're in a room full of breakable blocks with nothing else in it but a door. Going through that, you find yourself in a large open space with all the usual fortress trappings, candles, rotodisc spheres, and yes, that is what they're called, and those weird ghost platforms that boos pop out of. Except, none of the enemies are here with them. No hotfoots, no rotodiscs, and no boos. It's like someone forgot to turn the stage on before you walked in. So you go through the door at the far end and find yourself in a room with a lava pit, a pipe, and a power-up block. Try to go through the pipe and you find it's one way. Now, if you happen to be Raccoon Mario during all this, you might get the bright idea of flying up to the top of the room with no enemies. It just so happens the first 2 times I played this stage, I was not. So, what do? Well, go back to the first room and just break every block you can find. Surely there must be some clue here as to how the heck you get through this stage. But there's a lot of blocks in this room. It just so happens that the one you want is here, 1 block up and 4 over from the only non-breakable blocks in evidence. This opens up a secret door. Go through it and you'll find 2 pipes. The one on the right goes back to the lava room, and I am so sorry for you if you took it first. Take the left pipe and you find, not progress, but a block with a Tanuki suit in it. Okay, so now you may get the bright idea to fly up in the room with no enemies, and here you find a pipe in the ceiling which leads to Boom Boom and the exit. Whew. So yeah, despite the absence of any enemies, this fortress is a real doozy. I died here twice. Once trying to figure out which block to break in the first room, and once after getting the Tanuki suit and just having no earthly idea what to do with it. This is the most mind-bending stage in the game, and possibly the most influential. If you want to see the roots of the trollishly difficult Kaizo hacks of Mario games, and the extremely off-the-wall, open-ended nature of user-created Mario Maker levels, they're right here in this stage from 1988, 19 years before the first Kaizo hack, and a whopping 27 before Super Mario Maker. And finally, we have World 8, the Dark Land. After the wackiness of the pipe maze, this place comes across as a serious tonal lurch, because it's basically, well, not to beat around the bush, this is the closest Mario has ever come to taking a trip to hell. I know Mario literally dies and goes to the afterlife in Super Paper Mario, but the underwear is more of a Greek-style mystical underworld, whereas this is sheer, no-holds-barred fire and brimstone pandemonium. The sky is black, there's lava everywhere. Wherever there isn't lava, there's a pile of skulls. If you're willing to stretch your imagination a little, this could easily feel like the most horrifying place that has ever appeared in a Mario game. There are only 2 properly numbered stages in the Darkland, and neither one is a highlight for me, although I do like how the Angry Sun reappears in 8-2, looking as demonic as ever. I'm a bigger fan of the tank stages, which really sell the idea that Bowser is on the warpath, and you have to cut through his ranks like some kind of one-man army. I also really like the hand traps, which have a chance of dragging you into one of 3 tough but short stages underground. One of these contains every Hammer Bro variant in the game, which is pretty cool. Another is full of flying Cheep Cheeps, which seems a little off until you realize that ever since the original Super Mario Bros., flying Cheep Cheeps have always been evil, and they belong here. Then, of course, there's Bowser's Castle, which is the one thing I'm not going to spoil here. There's enough crazy stuff in that stage that it could take up 10 minutes on its own. But let's preserve a little of Super Mario Bros. 3's mystique, just in case you end up playing this game yourself. And with that, we return you to your regularly scheduled content.